Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 731 for the 9th of October 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you from a very wet rain, Sydney, Australia. In fact, a lot of the east coast of Australia is experiencing lots of rain, emergencies, flooding. Wow, lots of it. But what's coming up on the Skeptic Zone podcast this week? We speak to my friends, my good friends I've never met, who I'll be meeting soon, from the European Skeptics podcast, the real ESP experience. Pontus, Andras, and Annika join me, and a special guest, you'll hear who that is soon, as we discuss their upcoming trip to Australia to speak at Skepticon 2022 in Canberra, and that will be at the beginning of December. Always a pleasure to catch up with the ESP. Following that, it's a little look at some strange predictions made way back in 1952 about the then Queen Elizabeth II. What were seers and astrologers predicting for the Queen way back in 1952? And did it come true? Then we have the Australian Skeptics newsletter written by Tim Mendham, and this week read by me, as Adrian is taking some well-deserved time off. Then to round off the show, in the Trove segment, we have an interesting item written in 1979 from a Canadian newspaper, the Winnipeg Free Press, all about psychic surgery and Canadians going off to the Philippines in the desperate hope of a cure for their various diseases. So no matter where you are around the world, I hope you have found some time to get out and get a bit of a walk in, a nice walk. And a lot of people listen to the Skeptic Zone while they're doing their exercise walks. Even me. The Skeptic Zone and other podcasts I listen to as I'm walking around. It's quite strange when I listen back to the Skeptic Zone because quite often I will learn more listening to it back once it's all finished, because when you're making a podcast, when you're producing, when you're editing lots of interviews and items, you're not always listening to the content, the flow of the content. And later on, when you're listening to it back, you can sometimes get a better picture about what the interviewee was saying or the item. And so if you're listening to me now, even if you're listening to me now on those newfangled bone conduction headphones, I think they're called, these are the ones that you don't stick in your ear or on your ear, you stick next to your ear. And the sound sort of travels through the bone in your head into your ear canal or something like that. That way you can hear other things around you at the same time. Tricky. If you're one of those people, I really hope you're enjoying that experience. What will they think of next? But now it's time for me to run downstairs. What's in the fridge? Leftover pizza. Leftover soup. I know. I'll have some nice peanut butter toast. An old favorite. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
She sounds like a
grab the
bird.
microphone again.
I think I have discovered, my friends, the youngest skeptical podcaster. That's her now. Her name is Luna, and she's just giving her comments about homeopathy. What's that, Luna?
I'm a little bit afraid that we are totally ruining her because she is growing up thinking that a screen with Andras and Pontus on is the most important thing in the world.
Well, that's his problem.
Which it is, but...
Goodness me.
Je was in deine Hände hin.
Now, what?
Okay, do you think
How do you people get anything done?
we don't?
We don't, yes.
Yeah, usually.
Folks, with all this giggling, you have no idea. I'm with Pontus, Andras, and Annika. Hello, it's the ESP.
Ooh, hejsan, hejsan.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sziasztok.
The real ESP experience, the European Skeptics podcast. And of course, it's really wonderful to catch up with you all. I'm seeing you all, and the youngest skeptical podcaster there. Yeah, that's her. I can't wait till she gets her own show. When we all retire, right? She's going to take over. And she's going.
Yeah, we're already thinking of the succession here. This has to go on for a long time.
It looks like things are in good hands. The ESP podcast. I'm so pleased to be chatting to you all. And what's that? She keeps. Okay. Yes. I agree. We'll just keep agreeing with Luna, because you're all heading, and this is unbelievable. You're all heading to Australia for the Australian Skeptics National Convention. Annika, I know you've been here before.
Yes.
Yes. And in fact,
a few times actually, in 17, in 19, in 20, and now again.
And the last time you were here, we were hopefully planning to catch up in person, but it was still a little bit tricky with COVID and everything, so we didn't quite do that. But hopefully this time around, and
Okay, take away the hammer.
folks, I wish you could see what I'm seeing. There's a hammer now whacking the microphone. Maybe she's disagreeing with us. I don't know. But it's so exciting. Skepticon 2022, the Australian Skeptics National Convention. Let me kick off with you, Andras. Maybe what do you hope to do? What will you be talking about when you're here?
Well, since we're gonna have a couple of events lined up while we're there, we might end up talking about a couple of different things. But during the Congress, the convention.
Convention, yeah. Congress, convention, meeting.
So during the main event, I will give a talk on how to have an effect on political decisions and how to influence decision makers in politics so that science and skepticism is a much more important part of those decisions. And this has been a pet topic of mine for a while. And we did a whole panel discussion on this at the European Skeptics Congress, and I think it was quite a good move forward. So I'm trying to give an overview of what we could and we should do about that.
That sounds great. And Pontus, what do you hope to do? Are you going to be speaking about something different?
Yes, I will. I will talk about Sweden's COVID-19 response because there's a lot of, it was different. It wasn't the same as in many other countries, but there's also a lot of misinformation and disinformation about this around the world. During the time I got a lot of emails feeling sorry for me to have to live in a country that made such a mess out of everything. It wasn't really that, but it was special. So I'll try to sort out what was different, why it was different, and how bad was it really.
Wow. Because we were getting a lot of news about Sweden during the pandemic. You don't hear much about Sweden anymore. It's amazing how the world has changed since, not even a year ago. We were all in this crazy lockdown and things were looking completely different. Yeah. But things have certainly changed. Now we'll come back to Annika and Luna. We'll try that again.
Yes.
Hello. Now, of course, yes, as we were saying, Annika, you've been here before. What are you looking forward to this time?
Well, I think I'm looking forward to actually meet Australian skeptics. Mm-hmm. Because so far I've only seen friends and families, family members, of course, who are also partly skeptical. Yeah. I'm looking forward to catch up with my people, basically.
Absolutely.
with family and with Australian skeptics.
And with Australian skeptics. Well, I don't know if you have easy access to the stats. I mean, the podcasting service I use, I can look at a map of the world and I can see where most people are listening to my show. And I was just looking at that today, doing some, statistics. And most people are from the United States, probably because of the large population there. But it surprised me that one of the top 5 countries that listen to the Skeptic Zone is Sweden. How about that?
Oh, really? Yeah.
I should do it in Swedish.
Yes, you should. You should. I can give you a crash course when we meet.
Crash is right. Crash is right.
You already know the Hejsan Hejsan.
Hejsan. That's right.
Then it's easy from there.
So I was quite chuffed to see that.
But it's somewhat similar for us.
Oh yes, you have a lot of listeners in Sweden or Australia maybe.
Yes. Both, I think. But Sweden is right on top. Definitely, it's obviously the United States gives the largest chunk of our listeners, apparently. Sweden is right up there.
And Australia
and Germany.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder. I know this is great because. We didn't have any real set topic when I started to interview you just about the convention. But Pontus, can you give us any insight as to why the Swedish people might be more skeptical?
Well, I don't think it's just that. I think it's also that Swedes are fairly good at English. So they listen to a lot of English podcasts and fairly advanced when it comes to technology and things like that. So I think Swedes listen to a lot of podcasts in all kinds of subjects.
That's interesting. And again, big hello to all the Swedish listeners. I had the wonderful pleasure of visiting Sweden, I hate to say it, about 30 years ago during New Year's. Dark and cold and cold and cold it was, but it was beautiful nevertheless. It really was. Oh, now, I wish you could see this, everybody. Oh, hello. So Luna, the little baby Luna, has now got the earphones on. Hello. Hello, Luna. Ich heiße Richard. Hello. She's screwing up her face. I don't think this is a good sign at all. So when you were recording, the 3 of you, or the 4 of you, I might say, when you're recording your podcast, you do it like we're doing it now, so you can all see each other when you're recording.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And sometimes Luna is there and she is contributing, but then it's Annika's track is of course on a separate track, so we can mute it. And I think that our listeners have remembers we also sometimes we collect it and put it in as the outtakes.
Of course, we all have crunch. All sorts of things are happening. We all like to have outtakes and things at the end of the show. In fact, at the end of this show, folks, if you listen, there's a few things that we recorded just a little bit before the interview, which things were going a little bit... have a listen to that. Well, my friends, I can't wait to see you. I think you're all going to be in Sydney. Goodness me. I think you're all going to be in Sydney before the convention.
Yes, that's where we start, right? We start in Sydney, then I think we go to Melbourne, and then Gold Coast, and then Canberra.
Wow, you're going
to
be really busy. I can't wait to see you. I'll certainly be greeting you here in Sydney, and we'll have a few beers and bend some spoons and just have a good time, I think.
That sounds great.
Sounds amazing.
Yes. Amazing, yes.
And
Luna will be there too. Yeah.
Luna likes it too. Yes.
Luna as long as Luna likes it, then I'm happy. ESP, the ESP podcast, folks. If you don't listen to it, why not? It's one of the better skeptical podcasts out there. It's the European Skeptics podcast, of course, the real ESP experience. And I've been happy to chat with the hosts of this wonderful podcast, Pontus, Andras, and Annika, and Luna. And I look forward to seeing you soon. So until then,
same here.
Bye now.
Right. Hey do.
Cheers.
You told me that aliens really exist. You met
Sziasztok!
Hallå!
Hejsan hejsan!
Did you know the European continent is home to almost 750 million people living in 50 different countries, belonging to an even greater number of ethnicities?
And believe it or not, only a handful of them list English as the first or at least one of the official languages.
And there's an amazing amount of skeptical activism going on out there that you are not aware of because it's not in English.
Yeah, because you know, pseudoscience, quackery and fake news do not stop at borders. They get translated to other languages and transferred across the whole world.
So, if you're interested in weekly updates on what's going on in some of the countries here, providing you with all the interesting facts, news and even some skeptical history,
Or if you want to hear interviews in English with brilliant people you sometimes haven't even heard about,
then what you need is to subscribe to the ESP.
extrasensory perception. You must be really wrong.
no, the ESP as in
The
European Skeptics Podcast.
That's right. And if you're wondering how you can find us online, go to theesp.eu.
And you can also find us on Twitter at espodcast_EU, or you can like us on Facebook.
And if you want to subscribe, do a quick search on all the intertubes for the European Skeptics Podcast. You'll find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify and all the rest.
The European Skeptics Podcast.
The real ESP experience.
I don't know how you can believe.
Listeners will well remember the time we spent on the Skeptic Zone discussing the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, which is still being talked about. In fact, my friend Rob Palmer will be giving a talk about this very soon. And it's interesting to go back through some of the archives I've collected doing the project, because, you know, my search was wide, looking at psychic predictions. And one of the ones I found, which wasn't included in the project for a very good reason, because it was dated from 1952. In fact, it was published in a magazine or a newspaper called Labour Call from Melbourne on the 6th of March 1952. And it deals with Queen Elizabeth II. And I thought with the recent death of Queen Elizabeth II, it might be worth having a look at what this prediction said. And the headline is astrology a cruel creed or skilled art? There is at least one person who will dispute the claim of Dr. C. Irving Benson last week that astrology was a form of primitive religion, a cult, insidious creed. He is Cyrus D.F. Abakun of Ceylon. Ceylon, of course, now known as Sri Lanka. This gentleman has just announced to the world that he can accurately forecast by the stars the prosperity of Britain under Queen Elizabeth II. Although astrology may be an insidious creed, the views expressed by Abakun are interesting. In a letter to the Sunday Sun, dated February 10th, 1952, he foretells that between 1955 and 1958, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles, in all probability, will reign from Australia. Well, that's an interesting forecast for the then future. Abakun writes, "It might interest you to know that I have issued the following exclusive prediction on November 16, 1951, and it was published in the Times of Ceylon, Sunday Illustrated on December 30th, 1951. And the prediction is 1952 will be a significant year as 1837, when Queen Victoria ascended the throne. The Royal House of Windsor now takes precedence as the stars are weak for the kings and princes of Europe. Along with this prediction, I sent to Mr. Victor Lewis, the editor-in-chief, the following. For Australia, 1952 will be very disturbing in many ways. The royal visit is in danger of being cancelled. Now I have the pleasure in forewarning the following in the hope that you will be pleased to give notice of it in your esteemed journal. Princess Elizabeth becomes queen in the major period of Venus and the sub-period of Mars, the beginning of a prosperous time for Britain. Britannia will once again rule the waves. Engineering and shipbuilding programs on a gigantic scale will be carried through to a successful end. Commerce will expand. Her Majesty's reign can extend to 36 years. It did extend to 36 years, and a lot more after that. But the best years for Great Britain are 1968 to 1975. But as history recalls, I think there were some very major labour issues in that year. British people might remember those years. There were good times and bad times, I guess. It goes on. The Queen landed at London Aerodrome at a most auspicious time when the royal planet of Jupiter was on the mid-heaven in Aries, the ruling sign of England. I bet you didn't know that, English people listening. I bet you didn't know that. Owing to this, for 16 years from August 26, 1952, Great Britain, as well as Australia, under Queen Elizabeth II, will experience an expansive time. The planet Jupiter rules Australia. I bet you didn't know that, Australian listeners. The planet Jupiter rules Australia. Okay. Therefore, between 1955 and 1958, the Queen will in all probability reign from Australia along with the Prince of Wales to be, Prince Charles. From February 24, 1952, up until May 24, 1955, Prince Charles' stars seem to be predominant over Australia and Ceylon. An early visit to Australia by the Queen and the Prince can therefore be anticipated. In all probability, it will occur in the first half of 1953. So there we go, an odd find. And I think it just illustrates once again that thousands of predictions are published every year, well, going back as far as 1952 and much before then, of course. Full of all sorts of interesting bits and pieces. They fill up, in this case, 2.5, what do we got here? Columns, sort of spread over a page a little bit. It's interesting. It mentions the Queen, Australia. Why not? Let's fill up some newspaper columns with this. And in a couple of days, it's the chip wrapper or at the bottom of a bird cage, and it's long forgotten until someone like me digs it up out of the archives. But if you imagine the hundreds of thousands, millions of predictions published over the decades all around the world, and we recall that roughly 11% of just guesses come true when we're talking about psychic predictions, people can go back and point to the odd prediction and say, there you go, they got it right. How do you explain that, skeptic? You make enough predictions, some of them are bound to come true. Anyway, there we are, just a quick scatter around some of the thousands of little bits and pieces and clippings and archives I've collected over the years, many of which I used in the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project.
Hi, this is Rob Palmer. I write for Skeptical Inquirer as the well-known skeptic. This year, I will have the honor of speaking at Skepticon in Las Vegas. My topic will be Richard Saunders' Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, which had the goal of reviewing a large set of data to determine if there's evidence that individuals claiming paranormal powers really do possess the ability to foresee the future. Prior to the conference, I'm going to be doing an extended version of that talk via a Zoom session that you can join. This version will have details I don't have time to delve into at Skepticon. So, did the psychics get things mostly right? I bet even without any paranormal powers, you can predict the answer. The Zoom session will begin on Monday, October 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. That's Tuesday at 11 a.m. in Sydney. More information, including the Zoom link, is available at recoveringfromreligion.org/RFRX.
now we have the newsletter from Australian Skeptics. Normally read by Adrian Hill. Adrian's on vacation. Lucky Adrian. So this week you're stuck with me. This is newsletter number 158, written and compiled by Tim Mendham. Hi all, it says. Unfortunately, we missed International Ghost Hunting Day. Maybe that should be Ghost Hunting Night, which was September the 24th. But we do have Halloween coming up, which should give us lots of ghosts to share around. Meanwhile, it's sad to see Dr. Ken Harvey, one of Australia's leading campaigners against medical woo, step down from active duty. What a giant in the sphere of bringing quacks to account. And don't forget, this newsletter comes with stories and links that you can click on to read more about each story when you subscribe at skeptics.com.au. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, we'll do just that. Australian Skeptics News. Face-to-face at Skepticon 2022, 3rd and 4th of December. The annual Australian Skeptics National Convention, Skepticon, will be held at the National Library in Canberra on the weekend of December 3 to 4. And for the first time since 2019, it will be a face-to-face event. And as Skeptic Zone listeners know, we've been interviewing some of the upcoming speakers. Visit skepticon.org.au for more details and to buy your tickets. Bent Spoon Award nominations. You've still got time to put in a nomination for the Australian Skeptics Bent Spoon Award, one of the least sought-after credits in the skeptical world, or any world for that matter. Now, just the other day, an old friend wrote to me and said that the Aldi supermarket are selling some sort of weird face mask with lights, LEDs, with various claimed health benefits. Maybe that will appear in the Bent Spoon nominations. Go to skeptics.com.au and look up the Bent Spoon. If you have an individual or an organisation, maybe a media outlet, a supermarket chain, who you feel are worthy of the Bent Spoon, and you can nominate them. Paranormal TV series rises from the grave. Article on the resurgence of UK TV programmes and channels devoted to the paranormal. The local Office of Communications, Ofcom, has rules about programmes exploring, quote, exorcism, the occult and the paranormal, end quote, stating that depictions of the paranormal that, quote, purport to be real, as opposed to entertainment, must be treated with due objectivity, end quote, and, quote, must not contain life-changing advice directed at individuals, end quote. Nonetheless, some outlets are willing to, quote, push the boundaries of Ofcom's rules, end quote. Now, there's news here about the Canberra Skeptics having an AGM, a very important event. If you'd like to know more about that, the place to visit would be the Canberra Skeptics website, or you can follow the link at meet.google.com/WTE-ZARK-TON. But more news about that in the newsletter itself. The September issue of the Skeptic magazine is out with a major look at the mysterious and often secretive world of organised exorcism in Australia. How strange is that? Plus a review of the involvement of a psychic, in quotation marks, in a recent court case on the disappearance of Lynn Dawson and the guilty decision in the trial of her ex-husband. And indeed, there's the link in the newsletter where you can download a free article from the current issue of The Skeptic. If you haven't subscribed yet, it says now is the time to do so. Go to skeptics.com.au and sign up for the magazine, delivered to your inbox and to your letterbox. Items of interest. 34 most haunted places in the world. Oh, Adrian, I know you're listening. I bet you'd be into this. Interesting range from a geothermal mud pool to the usual candidates. A geothermal mud pool? A haunted geothermal mud pool? That'd be a nice one to stake out. But there's also one in New Zealand, a pretty impressive looking mock castle near Dunedin, and in Australia's Port Arthur in Tasmania, and also Old Parliament House in Canberra. I bet there are lots of ghosts of politicians and journalists wandering around Old Parliament House. Hurricane Ian conspiracy. The hurricane that hit Cuba and Florida was, of course, man-made. This 3.5-minute documentary explains why. It comes from Dane Wigington, founder of Geoengineering Watch and former solar panel installer. For some reason, he keeps referring to it as Hurricane Ian. Irish psychic knows where Putin is targeting next. Spoiler, it's Germany. Irish medium Gemma Lonsdale's somewhat incoherent spirit guide says, quote, I don't know what accent the spirit guide uses, so I won't bother, and get preparation plans, have a plan in place if there is some kind of attack and being prepared, new quote. Sounds like Yoda. Although the dodgy language might be the sub-editor's fault, I wonder. The medium can't be sure exactly when this will happen. Quote, spirits don't have the same time as us. Tonight, tomorrow, a week from now, I don't know how quickly this is coming. But the guide is really pressing the urgency of this. End quote. If they don't know what time it is, how can they? This story appeared in The Sun in the UK on September the 27th, so mark your calendars. You'll be pleased to know that Kenya and Australia are safe. Yes. Listeners in Kenya, there you go. Misleading headline of the week. Paranormal investigators killed. Oh dear. Yes, they were paranormal investigators, and no, the deaths had nothing to do with the paranormal. Sadly, a case of domestic violence. Oh dear. So why mention the couple's professions? They had billed themselves as, quote, electric voice phenomenon EVP experts, end quote, and apparently made frequent appearances on reality shows about the supernatural. But while the deaths are a depressing feature of society, the headline use makes it sound like there was something more supernatural. And finally, psychic dog wrong. JT, the psychic dog, would have preferred the North Queensland Cowboys to have won the 2022 National Rugby League Grand Final, but once they dropped out, he used his puppy powers to pick the Parramatta Eels against the Penrith Panthers. He was wrong, dramatically. This is actually a well-meaning article on an animal adoption centre. Shame they had to use some shonky premise to promote something so worthy. Will JT's failure mean that people go elsewhere to get a more trustworthy psychic pet? And that wraps up just some of the highlights from the current Australian Skeptics newsletter. You can get this newsletter delivered to your inbox every other week by signing up at skeptics.com.au. There's more to read here, and don't forget each story comes with a link to the article referenced. With thanks to Tim Mendham.
The Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention, Skepticon 2022, will be held on December 3rd through 4th, the first weekend of December. Go to the ticket sales page at skepticon.org.au to choose full in-person, one-day in-person, or streaming options. The event will be held at the National Library of Australia. The theme is Skepticism in a Changed World, and the lineup of speakers includes Claire Klingenberg, President of the European Council of Skeptical Organizations, the hosts of European Skeptics podcast, and live stream talks by Skeptics Guide to the Universe host, Dr. Stephen Novella, and Skeptoid host, Brian Dunning. There is also a wide variety of domestic speakers, including Major General Mike Ryan, retired, who will be speaking on science fiction and security professionals, author David Dufty on Radio Girl, ACT Academy of Sports psychologist Christine Dunn on superstitions in sport, controversial author Clive Hamilton on being censored, and many more scientific and skeptical topics. For full details, visit skepticon.org.au.
Now it's time once again to dive into those pages at Trove at trove.nla.gov.au and other sources from around the world. In fact, this time our primary source will be a newspaper from Canada. But this week's topic is psychic surgery. Now, psychic surgery has been around for a long time. You don't hear about it as much these days as you did a couple of decades ago, but people are still performing it, and victims are still being fleeced. And if we turn to the Skeptics Dictionary for a quick look, psychic surgery, and the words surgery are in quotations. Psychic surgery is a type of non-surgery performed by a non-medical healer. The healer fakes an incision by running a finger along the patient's body, apparently through the skin, without using any surgical instruments. The healer pretends to dig his hands into the patient's innards and pretends to pull out tumors. Using trickery, the healer squirts animal blood from a handheld balloon while discarding items such as chicken livers and hearts. The patient then goes home to die, if he or she was already dying, or to live if there was nothing seriously wrong in the first place. Psychic surgery is big business around the world, but especially in the Philippines and Brazil. Some people find solace in psychic surgeons and other faith healers because they think the healers are divine agents. And there's more on that page. I'll link it in the show notes. Now, there are many things that we know these days are outright scams and frauds. They have been investigated enough for us to confidently say. One of them is people who claim that they're using psychic powers to bend spoons. We know enough now to know that's a trick, and we know exactly how it's done, and we can see it being done. And the other classic is psychic surgery. It's a trick. It's a conjuring trick. It's sleight of hand. Randy exposed it many years ago. Other magicians have exposed it. You can't, and this is simply a fact of nature. You can't just put your hand through somebody's skin, take out organs, take your hand out and leave no incisions or anything else. It's a scam, it's a hoax, it's a trick, it's a fraud, it's deception, it's an act of a con artist. And I'll start with something from the Sydney Morning Herald, dated Friday the 1st of February 1985, in the Stay in Touch page under legal precedents. It says here, 2 members of the Australian Skeptics Society who set out to prove a Filipino psychic surgeon was a fraud got a shock this week when a Melbourne magistrate dismissed charges of obtaining money by deception against the healer. In Box Hill Court, Lawrence Kitchen, 44 of East Doncaster, had been charged with obtaining $30 by deception. Ramon Lopez, representing Mr. Kitchen, said the Skeptics Society members had not been deceived because they had expected to receive psychic surgery, quote, which by definition involves a fraud, end quote. Quote, the 2 people got what they asked for, end quote, Mr. Lopez said. The magistrate, Lionel Wilton Smith, said he was satisfied that what was known as psychic surgery had been performed on the 2 skeptics, but not that there had been a deception. Wow. I think His Honour missed the point all those years ago, nearly 40 years ago. But now let's turn to the pages of the Winnipeg Free Press from Canada, dated the 15th of February, 1979, and the story is Psychic Surgeons Selling Miracles? And that's a question. And this is a story by Andy Blick, spelled B-L-I-C-Q. A small group of Manitobans boarded a plane Wednesday and set off for the Philippines in search of a miracle. The members of the group are seeking healing by psychic surgeons. who claim their treatments begin when they plunge their hands through skin and then perform surgery without anesthetic, scar, or pain. And, despite warnings by doctors and the disappointment by some Manitobans who have made the trip in the past 2 years, members of the group are convinced they'll be helped. Reports of healings by psychic surgeons in the Philippines have been spread quickly, partly because of stories of miracle cures brought back to Manitoba from the Asian country by Lorne Magnuson, the nephew of Mabel Wagner, a Vancouver tour guide. Magnuson, who once attracted 140 people to a church hall he rented for a meeting to talk about the surgeons, had little difficulty sparking interest in their claims that they work with the power of God. Since 1977, and that was about 2 years before this article was written, at least 170 Manitobans have taken the Vancouver organised tours to the Philippines to see the psychic surgeons. Magnuson says 100 have taken the trip from Selkirk alone. As well, an unknown number of others have travelled there independently. Of those who made the trip, many admit they are seeking medical miracles to alleviate suffering. In the case of the terminally or chronically ill, it is a desperate attempt to avoid the inevitable, death. Critics of psychic healers, however, insist those who go leave with their hopes and money, only to return with bizarre stories. Photographs, kept in 4 scrapbooks by Norman Yarish of Lockport from past visits to see the healers, show on one page blood oozing from a skin opening while a psychic surgeon cleans a saliva gland. And indeed, on the top of the page, there are 3 photographs. A little hard to see what's going on because they're black and white. But yes, I can see that looks like there's an opening in the abdomen in one case. It says, snapshots from Norman Yarish scrapbook show psychic surgeons from the Philippines and some of their patients undergoing operations in quotation marks. The patients say there's no anesthetic, no pain, no scars. That's a little hard to see what's going on, but now I study them. Someone is lying on their back and it looks like there's an incision near the hip, possibly some incision near the throat and another one in the abdomen. And when I say incision, of course, I mean it's the illusion of an incision. We read on about the photographs. On another page, a man with his head bathed in blood is allegedly having a brain tumour removed, while on another a tumour is shown being removed. Some patients swear they have been cured, but doctors and others are universally sceptical. Dr. Ian Reid of the Selkirk Medical Centre said he is aware of 2 cases where the psychic surgeon's miracles have proven to be a hoax. Quote, I have tissue that was supposed to have been taken from my patient and it could not possibly have come from him, end quote, he said in an interview. Quote, they call it infantile fat tissue. Normally, if you take a tissue, you can specify whether it's from a domestic animal, wild animal, or human being, with tissue typing. This tissue was such an immature tissue, it couldn't be typed, end quote, Reid said. Quote, it was supposed to have been taken out of a rheumatic joint. This other man in Winnipeg, who is a diabetic, was told to stop his pills, and he got into trouble, end quote, he said. The tissue brought back to Winnipeg from the Philippines was later tested for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police by Dr. William Parker, the province's chief medical examiner. In an interview, Parker said the tissue could have come from an infant, possibly from an aborted or stillborn fetus. Quote, the only thing we couldn't rule out was very immature human fat tissue, end quote, he said. Quote, if it did come from Reid's patient, it's normal. And if it is, what are they doing taking normal tissue out? You can't rule out immature human baby fat. I thought it was chicken fat to start with, but it could well be human fat, but from a baby, say an abortion or something like that. The success of these people depends on a little bit of quackery and a great deal of faith from the patient," end quote, he said. In a letter to Reed, Parker wrote jokingly, quote, "The removal of this tissue could only cure obesity," end quote. "Patients who go there spend a couple of $1,000s. They go in spite of the fact their neighbors are saying you're a dummy," said James Randi, a founding member of the Council for Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, in a telephone interview from his New York office. "They have to come back cured. They can't come back and say, 'Hey, it was a trick. I really was an idiot to fall for that,'" he said. Yarish said Tuesday he would be among the group going to the Philippines Wednesday, although his family refused to confirm his departure Wednesday night. Another of those going, a Winnipeg woman who didn't want to be identified, said she was returning to the Philippines because she was told to do so by a psychic surgeon on an earlier visit. Quote, "I would have been 2 years already in a wheelchair," end quote, she said, while insisting her arthritis was relieved by treatments in the Philippines. 2 more weeks. Quote, "I'm going again because he," the psychic surgeon, "said I should have taken another 2 weeks treatment," end quote. While the elderly woman was reluctant to discuss her ailments and alleged cures of the psychic surgeons, Yarish was more enthusiastic. Quote, "He," the psychic surgeon, "healed me, and I can prove it," end quote, he said. Following diagnosis in 1977 that showed Yarish had an enlarged prostate, he had surgery done by a Winnipeg doctor. Quote, "About 6 weeks after that, I was to have great improvement and possibly even go back to work," end quote, he said. Quote, "In 6 weeks' time, I was far worse than I had been prior to the operation," end quote. Yarish said he had heard of the psychic surgeons through the tour guide Mabel Wagner and made a reservation. In Manila, he said those on the tour checked into a hotel and met a psychic surgeon known to Wagner. He said he paid for a total of 34 healings, each costing him $7. Seeing psychic surgeons for 17 to 25 days on his tour, he claims his prostate gland and a duodenal ulcer were removed, intestinal disorders taken care of, and, quote, "tiny tumors and blood clots," end quote, extracted. He also maintains cancer was removed from his kidneys. Reed, a colleague of Yarish's doctor, said the apparent prostate cure can be explained. The inflamed prostate could quite easily subside on its own and would not show up in X-rays, he said. Psychic surgeons also claim to be able to heal from a distance, and Yarish said his wife's high blood pressure was cured in an, quote, "absent healing," end quote. He said the psychic surgeon told him he would, quote, "send her out an absent healing for 6 months and I'll cure her right at home, but try to get her out here before 6 months are up," end quote. Told to avoid X-rays. When the psychic surgeons had finished their work and the tour was ready to go home, Yarish said its members were told, quote, "This healing will take place from 3 to 6 months. So when you go home, don't go to work for at least 2 months and under no circumstances have any X-rays taken as it will stop the healing," end quote. However, Reed said the psychic surgeons also tell people if they see a doctor or have X-rays within 3 months of their visit, it will invalidate treatment. Quote, he covers himself. Within 3 months, most people would see somebody in today's medicine. The guy has a perfect out, end quote. Now, I'll just stop here and say that's a fascinating little insight I had never realized, that these charlatans would try to put that condition on their victims when they go home. Don't see doctors, basically. Don't have this checked out. Yarish remembers from his first visit to the Philippines that some people were not healed. Quote, I don't know what the reason for that was, whether they didn't have the faith or whether there was some friction in there among the healers. And I'll break in here once again to say another classic excuse. If you weren't healed, if this didn't work for you, etc., it's not the fault of the psychic or the healer or the mechanism. It's your fault for not being faithful enough or believing. We read on. Quote, there are 450 healers in the Philippines. They claim only 26 of them work with the power of God. End quote. The organized trip to the Philippines, which includes tours to faith healers, hotel and breakfast, cost most people $1,798. But for an enterprising individual, there can be a saving. A Free Press reporter, and I assume that means this newspaper, who called tour guide Mabel Wagner, was offered a free trip for lining up 15 customers. In a telephone conversation, Wagner explained how things work, starting with a, quote, certified check to a travel agency which handles the tours. Wagner said the address of the agency is on a brochure available from Lorne Magnuson, her nephew in Selkirk. Although psychic surgeons are said to work with the power of God and do not accept money for their services, Wagner gave instructions for potential tour members. Quote, tell them to take at least $200, and if they spend $200 on the psychic surgeons, fine. If they don't spend $200, that's fine too. It's not too much money for your health. We promise them the best, but we don't promise them they can be healed because we can't promise that, end quote, she added. One Selkirk man said that while he is convinced the psychic surgeons cured his heart problems, he wants other people to know they can save money by traveling to the Philippines independently. Quote, instead of letting people go on the tour, I got to looking for travel agencies for them and showing them how cheap it is, end quote, he said. Quote, people who are sick are interested. If you've got cancer, you've got nothing to lose, end quote, he said. I'll stop here again and say, as Randy told me many times, these people have much to lose. They lose their money, they put their hope and belief in something and they can lose all that. Their families can lose money. They can lose any chance of extended life with proper treatments. There's a lot to lose. We read on. Quote, some people just don't believe it. And it's good they all don't. Or there'd be a mad rush to the Philippines. You wouldn't get in when you wanted to go, end quote. But according to investigators, the Philippine healers would like nothing more than a rush of people. Surgeons are controlled. Randy said psychic surgeons operating in the Philippines are part of a business controlled by a man named Tony Agapao. Dr. Augustin Roy, president of the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Quebec, was once commissioned by a Montreal newspaper to investigate the psychic surgeons. Quote, I tried to arrange for an interview with Tony, end quote, Roy said in a telephone interview. Quote, it was not possible to see him unless we paid quite a large amount of money, end quote. Roy said he eventually gained access to where Agapao was operating. Quote, I saw very clearly there was no incision, no cut, but I could see blood or red stuff looking like blood and a kind of cotton to wipe the blood away, end quote, he said. Quote, I could see Tony taking something out from the body and he just threw it in a basket. So I just went into the basket myself to take the cotton and the blood. Funny enough, the blood disappeared within a minute, end quote. Roy said material taken from the body of the patient was a plastic-like stuff. Quote, as soon as I put my hands in the bucket, they went after me, and I can tell you I didn't stay there very long. The next day I went out of the Philippines because I didn't want to get killed, end quote, he said. Quote, the problem is the people I saw there were chronic patients, cancer patients, or patients with diseases that can't be cured. These people were trying to sell hope to them that they could be cured, end quote, he said. And the other pictures on this page are of James Randi, Norman Yarish, and Dr. William Parker. Now, if you want to see an example of psychic surgery, it's not too hard to find on the internet, on YouTube. Just type in psychic surgery. But what I'll do in this week's show notes is I'll link directly to the segment of the video Secrets of the Psychics with James Randi, where James Randi appeared on the Johnny Carson show and did a live demonstration of psychic surgery. And I can't help wonder, and I suppose they still do it, people from Canada and other countries still would be possibly flying to the Philippines. Although maybe COVID put an end to that temporarily, I don't know. Still flying over to receive this sham treatment. Psychic surgery, just one of the many interesting topics we can look up in the pages of online newspaper resources like Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, or possibly one no matter where you are around the world, because you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone this week, and as ever, thank you to those people, those wonderful people who contribute to the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. At skepticzone.tv, it means the show keeps going. In fact, I just did my tax paperwork just the other day, and I was glancing over the incomings and the outgoings and things like that, and I can assure you that there would be no Skeptic Zone. I'd have to put all my podcasting equipment away and sell it on eBay if it wasn't for the generous support of listeners just like you. Thank you very much. Coming up on next week's show, we're going to be looking at some of the newspaper reports of a very famous UFO incident here. Oh, when I say UFO incident, it's sort of wrapped up in the folklore of UFOs here in Australia, of Frederick Valentich, who disappeared many years ago over Bass Strait, and that's the strait between Australia, the mainland of Australia, and the state of Tasmania. What were some of the reports mentioned in newspapers at the time? And we're also going to look at some of the conclusions reached by other investigators such as Joe Nicol and Brian Dunning on this very interesting case. Also, I hope to bring you an interview with some of the science communicators here in Australia, the Australian science communicators, who are also involved in that great science outreach program, A Pint of Science. Science in the Pub. It's sort of like Skeptics in the Pub. Speaking of Skeptics in the Pub, just in the last week, Australian skeptics here in Sydney went back to the pub. My word, it was good to be back in the real pub, to hear a real speaker in a real pub and have a real beer. And our speaker was Xeon Lights. You might have heard of her. She's an advocate, a strong advocate for nuclear power, and I hope to line up an interview with Xeon Lights in the next couple of weeks. I think you'll find it very interesting. Anyway, it was fabulous to be back in the pub, and if you go to the Australian Skeptics YouTube channel, you can see that talk that was given by Xeon Lights in Skeptics in the Pub. But for this week, with all that having been said, this is Richard Saunders signing off from, looking out the window, what is it now? Sunny and cloudy, bright sunshine and dark clouds, Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter @Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Luna has now grabbed the microphone. She's trying to eat it. And I can
yes. Oh boy.
That was hilarious. How on earth do you get a podcast done? This is
Yeah, well
Usually Scotty takes Luna.
The secret is that we have to time it well.